way to determine what is important for the brain is to look at how much real estate is devoted, or brain area is devoted to a particular behavior or response. So when we do this with the brain, there's no denying that movement is really important. Let's just look at a human brain. It's got the brain stem, and we have this cerebellum kind of hanging off the back of the brain, literally means little brain. And 78% of all of our brains, 86 billion neurons, are in the cerebellum. Cerebellum is involved in motor coordination, movement, some other things like conscious awareness and learning, but movement. There's another structure in the middle of the brain, a large collection of structures known as the striatum. And the striatum is involved in movement and coordinating movement. People with neurodegenerative diseases such as Parkinson's disease or Huntington's disease has some compromised tissue here, and it's difficult to facilitate movement. So this is a large structure in the middle of the brain. And then there's this band of tissue on the cortex known as the motor cortex. And this area is regulating the muscles that are important to carry out the movement that we need to do to interact effectively with our environment. And there are other areas. There are areas in the frontal cortex that are important for decisions about the movements we're going to make. But with the cerebellum, the striatum, the motor cortex, and then as we go down the brain to the spinal cord and look at the spinal nerves that are connected to muscle, that allows us to flex our muscles, to contract muscles so that we can engage in movement. This tells us that the brain has invested a lot of its territory, a lot of its real estate in movement. Another observation that reinforces this idea that brains are important for movement is to look at this interesting little creature called a Csquirt. And a Csquirt during development has a nervous system. And it uses this nervous system to swim around in the water and find the rock that it wants to live on for the rest of its life. Once it identifies this home territory and there's no more reason to move, it digests, actually eats its own brain and uses that material, recycles it. It seems as if you don't need to move around, you don't need a brain. Well, brains are doing some other things, but it does reinforce the idea that movement is incredibly important. We look at rodents in my laboratory, and we've learned a lot about neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, with rodent models, and movement seems to be important here as well. So if we look at our rat brain, so let's look at a cross section of a rat brain. So this is kind of a lopsided one. There's a structure known as the hippocampus. And this is involved in spatial memories in these animals. As they run mazes and learn spatial maps, the hippocampus is important. So this is telling us that it's something related to movement and where the animal has been and remembering that. The studies that are so interesting, if we take a rat and put it in a running wheel, and so it's able to turn this wheel and run. It's not really going anywhere, but it's moving like it is. And we compare those animals to animals that have just been in standard cages and they don't have that ability to move in the same capacity. If you look at their hippocampus, there's more evidence of something that we call neurogenesis. And this is the production of new neurons. Neurons are the cells in our brain. I mentioned we have 86 billion cells in the human brain. And we used to think that we were born with all the neurons we were going to have. Now, strong evidence that these neurons continue to be produced throughout our lifetime. And with these rodent models, we can clearly see this and count new cells. So running kicks up the neurogenesis, which seems to be very healthy. In fact, a lot of our treatments for depression, such as antidepressants, electroconvulsive shock therapy, exercise, and some of those behavioral programs seem to all have this common denominator of increasing, either directly or indirectly, or short-term, long-term neurogenesis. So this is movement. It seems to be very healthy for mental health as well. This is kind of a full body exercise running, but we can also look at more skilled motor movements or motor skills, such as humans who are taught to, there have been studies where they've had half the subjects or participants learn to juggle. They didn't know how to juggle, but they have to do this for a couple of months. And some that did not, they had some other task, but they didn't have to juggle. And then they did brain scans, fMRI scans, and it showed that the area in the parietal lobe, kind of here, that's involved in information about our bodies and movement and our sensory systems, is actually larger. So it built some new real estate learning to do these fine-tuned motor systems. So when we talk about neuroplasticity, which is good for healthy brains, our brain's ability to change throughout time to meet the demands of a challenging environment around us, exercise, movement, controlled motor skills all seem to kick up new cells or make the cells that we have bigger, increase blood supply to get oxygen and glucose to those cells. So movement seems to keep these brains humming. There's another aspect of movement that we like to study in the lab, and it's exploration. And it's interesting to think of how brains decide to explore or exploit a territory. Do you keep moving around to explore and kind of discover that territory, or do you just sit there and exploit and learn everything and benefit from the resources that are there? There's some balance that needs to take place. But other rodent research, if you put them in what we call an open field, there are individual differences. Some will be very active and they'll explore every little nook and cranny of that environment. And some may be, we think they're more timid or shy and they'll kind of hang around in one corner. The mice that are more engage in more exploration have higher levels of neurogenesis. So this discovery seems to be important, exploration important. Of course, we need to take advantage of resources as well. But humans, if we think about our exploration, once humans, our ancestors, left Africa, we have explored every bit of this planet Earth and beyond. We have certainly looked at fish and all the animals in the water and that territory, and exploring space. If we can think about it, we want to explore it. And humans have some very sophisticated brains. This outer area called the cortex has more nerve cells or neurons than any other animal on the planet. And other animals explore, but we may have done more exploring than any other animal on the planet. But other animals that I study, such as rats and raccoons, they have traveled along with us as well. So we're not completely unique there. But exploring brains, discovering brains, this seems to require a lot of brain real estate, and it probably enhances and continues to enrich our brains to engage in these different forms of movement. And we're reminded the importance of movement and exploration on the complexity of the brain if we consider an interesting animal. Let me try to get this. The koala. Now, koalas are, found them in Australia. They're a marsupial, a wonderful, cute little animal, and it doesn't do a lot of exploring. And in fact, most of the time, if you're looking for a koala, you're going to find it close to a tree. And that tree is the eucalyptus tree, and it exploits these eucalyptus leaves. So it doesn't travel very far. And in fact, koalas are known, not to be too negative, but they're not known for their cognitive flexibility. They're kind of stuck in their ways. And in fact, as their environment has become compromised, their habitat and the eucalyptus leaves that they have evolved to specialize in for their diet, as that has become compromised and threatened, and scientists have tried to move them to new territories, they don't want any part of it. They want to go back to where they came from. So it's difficult for them to adapt to new environments, to explore new environments. Well, are there any clues about this in their brains? So there hasn't been a lot done with koala brains, but what I found is, again, they're not too impressive in the fact that they don't even take up the entire skull capacity. So they're seem to be a little deflated in that way. And also, if you look at their brains and this cortex that I was talking about, it's completely smooth. There aren't any wiggles, bumps, and we call them sulci and gyri in the koala brain. So that cortex is smooth, and it doesn't have, with these wiggles and the gyri and bumps, it increases the surface area of the brain, and we don't see that with the koala. So this could be very problematic for koalas because they have really settled for exploit their resources with this one eucalyptus leaf. And in fact, most of their energy, one reason why their brain is probably limited, the capacity is limited, is it takes so much energy to digest those eucalyptus leaves. They're really poison. So brains require a lot of energy. They only take up about 2% of our body weight, but require, and for humans, 20% of our energy. So a lot of that energy for the koala is going to digestion and not to the brain. And this could be very problematic if these animals do need to explore new territory and move on so that they can be flexible and take on new challenges. So regardless of whether or not we're exercising and producing new cells or bringing new blood flow and nutrients to the brain, learning new cognitive skills like juggling, so that we can build new brain circuits and new brain territory that probably goes away when we stop doing the juggling. We can still looking at the long-term effects, or exploring, getting out our maps and thinking, going to new areas so that we understand when resources are depleted that we can go to this new area. There's actually some research suggesting that the hippocampus that's involved in neurogenesis, or the hot zone for the zone for neurogenesis, is not only involved in memories of past experiences where we've been, but also planning where we're going. So the research, neuroscience research, suggests that we need to grab our sneakers and exercise and continue and take on new motor skills, cooking, eating, woodworking, knitting, and think about exploring and be in tune with the environment so that we're ready to adapt to that next new challenge. So healthy brains are moving brains.